So Masuma, I'm so excited and glad to be here with you tonight. And where are you in London?
I am in London.
All right, what time is it there?
It is late at night.
Well, we appreciate you. I know what is it, 7 hours later?
I'm 5 hours ahead of you, so it's not that bad.
Okay, I'm totally wrong, but it's kind of late. But no, I have this amazing copy of your book,
Oh,
which is I love so much. I think it's so wonderful. And I would love to hear, just like hear a little bit, can you talk a little bit more about your background? I have to tell you, my first job out of college was at CNN as well.
yeah, I worked at CNN, though not in Atlanta. I was in New York, but I'm a journalist. I spent the beginning part of my career in newsrooms, and I was covering like important, serious topics like politics, and I ended up always drawn to just stories of people and what their lives look like, and always found a way to like go find a love story or go find the story of like what it is to be a girl somewhere, or like get the project with the disposable cameras where I sent cameras out to women around the world and tried to like get it under the radar of like I have this weird idea, I just want to show what the world looks like through people's eyes, and that was what I kept returning to. So I had grown up between continents. I was born and raised in India, then moved to the US as a child, and then went to college in England. So I was bouncing around between countries, and in 2017 I moved my life into a suitcase and left the US for South Asia, the rest of the world, and started bouncing around and found myself drawn to just like stories of teenage girls where whenever I had the option, I saw that I ended up sitting in like village houses with teenage girls and chatting with them and gossiping with them. And that was what brought me the most joy. And those were the stories I really wanted to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And that isn't really something that fits into like a proper journalism as we see it traditionally, right? Like you don't publish stories generally in CNN that's like, here's a conversation I had with a teenage girl, which is what like eventually led to this book. Was just that was where my curiosity kept taking me.
Oh, I love that. And then, so how would you overcome the language barrier when you would talk to like those girls just sort of formulating the project?
So with the project, the project in I was reaching girls through lots of different ways. But when I was starting out, I was talking to people in languages they spoke and languages I spoke. So when I was in India, I was talking to people in Hindi or either English, and it was fine. But with the book, I realized that I wanted to reach a broad range of girls, and it also meant that when I had to reach girls through lots of different mediums and in betweens, where I basically messaged every person I had ever met in my life and was like, hey, I remember you once mentioned your cousin lived in this country, do you want to introduce us? You don't know who I am? Oh, we had coffee like 4.5 years ago and it was half an hour and we added each other on Facebook. Or it was one of the girls in the book, Alejandra, she's a soccer player in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I found her through a football club, like a soccer club for young women in Argentina. Another girl, Claudia, who's on the cover of the book, I can show you. This is Claudia. She's a surfer in her Wonder Woman suit, which just brings me so much joy. I found her she lives in Vanuatu in the Pacific Islands, and I found her through the Vanuatu Surf Association. Another girl, Halima, in Afghanistan, I found her through this organization that builds schools for girls, Sahara, a US-based organization, and they connected me with her. So sometimes I was talking to girls directly and we spoke the same language. Sometimes I was going through like 3 different people. Sometimes it was through an organization or their school teacher. So I had to like standardize somewhat of like this is what a diary entry is, this is what a project is, and I would translate it into their language and get it to them. And there was often like lots of back and forth between me, translator, and the girls.
Interesting.
And then eventually you'd get to the point where like Halima in Afghanistan would be like, oh, I love Celine Dion. And I'd be like, oh yeah, me too. Okay. We have something in common. It's fine.
Oh, I love that. I find that very similar to what I do when I'm doing my books. So I will kind of crowdsource through my social media, and I will have ideas in mind of areas I want to shoot, of interest I want to shoot, of but then when I actually put the word out there, I feel like it gets so much better because things I never could have imagined people will come to me and say, oh, what about, a blind swimmer that is, and I'm like, oh, that, she's has her dog on the deck with her. I'm like, that is so amazing. Yes. Like, I feel like, we're limited by what our frame of reference is. And I love that when these projects that, you start with this germ of an idea, and then it just gets out there and it gets bigger and better, and it just gets wider than even our own expectations.
Has it ever been the case for you where you do you put out very specific asks of what you're looking for? Is it just like, I'm looking for a girl who's an athlete?
Mm-hmm. So it generally depends on some of the way that I shoot. So if I'm going to LA, for example, for a commercial shoot that somebody else is paying for, I will tack on an extra day in LA and shoot for my book. So if I'm in LA, I'll be like, oh, I should get a surfer and a skater, things that are maybe more geographically in tune with that area. So, but then I'll also say looking for strong girls in the LA area, and then also reach out to organizations that would not have access necessarily, like the kids would not have access to, know somebody that knows me or things like that. And it just gets so much better than I can imagine. I wonder, did you have, for this book, did you have countries in mind or girls in mind or ideas in mind that you really wanted to reach, but then did it grow as like somebody would suggest somebody or things like that?
Yeah, I was very I knew that obviously, as I'm sure you face this with your books, it's just a sense of, I want to include as many girls as possible. Also, there's only so many pages this book can be. This cannot be, encyclopedia, all the girls in the world, although I would love that. And I just put the word out basically everywhere. I knew I wanted to include a diverse range of voices. I knew it couldn't be comprehensive, but I wanted to be inclusive. So made sure that getting girls from different parts of the world who live different types of lives, who had different identities in all the different ways possible. And then just let it go where it went a little bit, where I would get connected to someone in a place, or I would get connected with an organization and just say, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do you have any girls in mind who would be interested in participating? And let it take the course it would. I never imagined that one of the girls in Mongolia, South Goal, she is the daughter of nomadic herders who move with the seasons. I never could have expected that I would have ended up reaching her. I was just like, oh, this is a place that most of us probably aren't going to travel to. And it would be cool to see what life looks like for a girl there. And I knew that there were lots of nomads in Mongolia. It was there's no way I'm going to end up reaching someone who's a nomad, because how would this organization in the city end up talking to them? And when I reached out to them, they were like, oh, actually, we have 3 girls we work with. One of them might be interested in doing this with you. She goes to school during the week, but maybe when she's home with her family, that's when she could take some photos and write some diary entries for you. Yeah, totally.
Oh, that is amazing. That was one of the questions as a photographer. I'm like, how did you get all the photos? How did you direct the girls? Did you how did you end up getting, because I've seen them in black and white, just because the advanced copy is black and white, but I'm dying. The cover photos are so I feel like they do them such justice. So I'm just curious how you got such vibrant and great photos.
I just asked, the instructions I gave for the diary entries were very similar to instructions I gave for photos, which was basically I want to see your life. And then I would give really mundane instructions, which they would often come back to me and be like, what do you mean you want to know what I had for breakfast? And be like, I want to know what you had for breakfast. That's super interesting to me. Or, ask for, show me what your bedroom looks like, which is always a good one with kids. It's where do you sleep? If you don't have where do you sleep at night, right? Show me what your house looks like. Show me what the walk to school looks like. If you're going to school, take photos with your friends, take photos with your family. What does fun look like? And gave them a ton of prompts. And then people would just come back with all of this. There wasn't a ton of direction. And very often, I would just ask for more. It would be like, oh, these 3 photos are great. Could you send me 7 more, please? Or hey, this is, one of the girls, Rukaya from Baghdad. She and I text on Facebook Messenger, and that is how we communicate. And so and that's also how she did her diary entries, where, so the book is diary entries from all 30 girls. And I gave them broad instructions of what a diary entry was. And some of them were just here's photos of my journal. And she came back and she was like, okay, this sounds great. I'll just text you every evening. And then
Hmm.
we would end up having a conversation and be like, oh, can you just, leave it there. You can just send it to me at the end of the week. Like write it down. Write it
Yeah.
down in paper. Put it in your notes app. Is that an option? And she would just like take selfies in our chat and send them to me and be like, this is great. You mentioned that you went out for pizza with your friends. Tomorrow, when you go out somewhere with your friends, can you take a photo when you're out there? Don't wait till the end of the day to send me a selfie. Or she'd be like, oh yeah, I was telling my grandma about this. Here's a photo of grandma. I'd be like, this is great. Can you take another photo? Like not while you're texting me. So there was a little bit of direction sometimes, but very often it was just like everyone wants to show you like happy photos of their lives. So it
Oh,
wasn't.
I found the bedroom ones the most interesting. Like I just thought that was because it's such a personal space and they do look so vastly different across the world. And I don't know, I just feel like you get to it's my favorite thing. And one of the reasons I love photography so much is I love like peeking into people's lives and seeing how they live without maybe that armor you put on, as you go, go out in the world, but like it's just you feel a little exposed and vulnerable, and I think that maybe that's why I just really thought those really resonated with me. I'm curious, like the girls that you spoke to, and I know in the U.S. here for sure that it's a big part of their lives with social media. Is that across the world? Did you find?
Yeah, I think it varied from girl to girl in terms of how online she was and what community she was finding. Sometimes girls talked about, like Myriad, one of the girls in the book from Sweden, talked about using Instagram to find other queer girls like in her country who she befriended on Instagram. And like I asked her about it for more details, and she like gave me like a whole thing of like I commented in so and so's post and then so and so was friends with so and like gave me the whole breakdown of like how they met and like whose post and who commented first. And that was how she made friends. Another girl, Emma from Ireland, like she's a Shawn Mendes super fan, and she wrote about like I won't ruin it for you, but there's like this journey she goes on over the course of a few days of like trying to win an opportunity to meet him. And she wrote a lot about like her fan accounts that she runs, and she has a couple of them, and that is like that's where her people are, that's where she's found her friends, because they all love the same artists. And so like that is where she made friends. And then like for other girls, sometimes girls would write about like, oh, I have like certain amount of credit on my phone for data, and so I'm gonna watch like my one YouTube video of the day now, or like I'm gonna spend
Oh,
my hour on the couch like watching whatever until I run out of internet. So it really varied, like access to internet as well.
oh yeah, it's funny. The Shawn Mendes thing is universal. I've taken my daughters to his concerts here in Atlanta. That I mean, I find that so interesting. I mean, I think yeah, it would certainly make. I think if I told my girls here, you can watch one video or you can do watch one TikTok, they would be like, and they're 15 and 12, so they're right in this this age range. I think that would blow their minds to know that that's like it's like eating a candy bar at the end of the day for these girls. It's like their treat. I find that's so interesting. How long was this process? How long did putting the whole book together take you?
So the book came out of a series that I did for the Lily, which is very similar in terms of concept. It was diary entries from 12 girls from 10 different countries. And some of those girls are in the book as well. And that series was the fall of 2018, and then started putting this book together early 2019. And it's funny because the like bulk of the putting together of the book happened in 2019, and I basically like did not touch the book in 2020. So it's this weird snapshot of like what life looked like right before we entered into a pandemic, and everything changed for everyone everywhere. And even like talking to the girls now, where I'm in touch with some of them very regularly, and they'll tell me things about their lives. I'm like, oh, it's so different. Like everything has changed for you. And everything you maybe had like planned for the next year or 2 years is completely shifted, which is wild. And even they'll say things, especially when you're that young, 1 year or 2 years is a really long period of time, and they'll come back to me and be like, oh, I got my copy of the book, and it's so interesting. Like the things I wrote about 2 years ago are so vastly different from, you know, what my life looks like now. I was a junior in high school and now I'm a freshman in college and I'm doing like Zoom college and I don't see my friends. So it's been a wild ride over this period of time.
I mean, I think it's tough for everybody, but I feel particularly for kids that are in high school and college and making that transition, because it's such a special time in your life and it's so social that to have that part taken away is, I don't know, I just really, really feel for these kids, and I hope they come out of it with with some perspective. I know my 15-year-old daughter, she was like, the only thing that I've learned from COVID is that if ever I get an opportunity to do something, I'm never saying no. And I'm like, well, that's good and bad, but like, let's not be unsafe, but I like it in the long run, you know, like I want you to try new things. But for me too, I feel like it's made you appreciate, it makes me sad to go scroll through my phone to see the things I was doing. I was like, oh, my life was so cool a year ago. Like it's just this, I mean, it's hard. But have you any interesting or specific stories about these girls that have changed since COVID, that you can share or you're able to share?
I think for some of the girls, like one of the girls, she went from Cambodia to Australia. We've like followed her through the Lily series. So she's Chamliakna. She was 14, 15 at the beginning. She was in Cambodia. And then she is so smart, so bright. She got into a high school in Australia, went to Australia, and wrote like really evocatively about homesickness and like what it's like to leave home, and also to know that like the better opportunities are out there, but you know, you're missing your family basically. And it's something I really relate to because I have left home a lot. And she's back in Cambodia now, waiting for like COVID to pass basically. And you know, she's like she had this whole plan which she listed out. I'll show you also.
Oh, I like the color. Yes. Her quote about not having a lot of friends broke my heart, because it's one of those things in there that I was like, I don't like this. Or you know, she has maybe she meant like she said she has a few true friends, right? She's okay, is what I'm asking, right?
I think she's okay. It's a thing that like came up a lot with a lot of the girls, and actually is a thing that has stayed with me. Like we all in this weird time feel a lot of FOMO of like even related to our past selves, right? Like you're saying, like scrolling through your phone and thinking back of like all the fun and like being outside your home that used to happen. The low bar now, for like what fun looks like. But a lot of them write about just how they feel like they don't have very many friends, and that was like a recurring theme throughout. Because I asked about friendship, I always asked about like, you know, who are your friends, and like Alejandra, the girl from Argentina, wrote about like, oh, you know, I don't have the kind of best friend I see in the movies. I've like never had that kind of friendship. And I was like, oh man, I've never had that kind of friendship either. Like that's the thing that I always wanted too. And then she writes about like, oh, but you know, maybe someday I'll have that. And like Halima from Afghanistan was like, oh, you know, I only have 6 true friends in my life. It's like, that's a lot of true friends, girl. Like, but that's not how, and like Chamliakna wrote as well about like, oh, you know, I don't have a lot of friends, like adjusting to a new place. And this is like a consistent theme of like, oh, you know, I don't have that, like I have 3.5 friends, I have 6 friends, like I don't have that many friends. And it's like, no, you have people. But what we see of like teenage life on social media, in the movies, in books, it's just like people who have like their ride or die friends, like the people who are always with them, always hanging out at each other's houses. Or you have like a big group of people, even if you're not like the cool kid, you know, the other kids all have their groups, and like everyone is part of like a group of, you know, X number of people, and you're always together and you have each other's backs. And that's not what real life looks like. Most of us don't have that and didn't have that at that age. but no one is saying that. So everyone feels a little bit like, oh, I'm on my own. I'm the only one.
Yeah.
It's not the case.
Yeah. I wonder if there's also like this thing that girls do is like, no, I don't have that many, you know, like where you're always sort of underselling yourself a little bit. And I swear, I wish there was some sort of like social media education where you have to teach especially our girls and women to look at social media with a critical eye. You're like, they don't have that many friends. They're not having that much fun. Their face doesn't look like that. Those are not real. That is not real. You know, just that way you're like, you're just, everything that's put out there is Facetuned or filtered or cleaned up. Like if you turn this camera this way or this way, there is a huge mess right in here. So I'm doing it right now. Like, oh, my basement is so neat. But you know, I think like understanding, and it's even for adults, it's hard to understand. It's hard to remember that nobody has as many friends as they have on social media, or is having as much fun or looks as good as they do online.
I have a friend who always reminds me that no one ever goes to the bathroom in the movies, and that's how you know they're not real. And that's the thing I have to remind myself constantly of. I'm like, oh, I'm just seeing a highlights reel, right? Like that is not what life looks like. And that's like some of what I was hoping would come through in this book was just like here's some really like boring day-to-day stuff, and I want to know what that looks like, because we never get to see what that looks like for anyone, like the person down the road or the person across the world. Like you just have no idea of like what happens when they go home, or like what happens when the photos are taken and like they're having a fight with their mom, or like they have a pile of homework. And you know, it's like life just looks like life everywhere, and we never get to see that. We only get to see the nice stuff. And there's something about also the way in which I think, especially for girls right now and young people right now, there's a sense of like you're very conscious of the fact that you have an audience, whether the audience is like the 7 people who follow you, or it's like you're an influencer with a large audience. But it definitely shifts the way life is portrayed on our phones. And my hope for this book is like the fact that there's so much slowness here of like, it's been 2 years, right? And the only person they knew that this was being published, but the only person they were getting any sort of feedback from was me. And my feedback was always just like, I'm curious, tell me more. It was never, you know, this is like, I'm not gonna like this, I'm not gonna like, that was not the feedback they got. So I hope in some ways that this book can like push back a little bit, and like what we see is like the very curated lives on our phones, and just like this is how boring and normal life looks like everywhere. And it's still interesting and makes you feel a little less alone.
Yeah, like you are enough without filters and falsehoods. Yeah, it's honestly, that's for me, that's my strong as you pretty started that way, because I didn't want my girls to think that they had to, when they were little, that they had to brush their hair or smile or put on a clean outfit to be beautiful. And then I noticed that the images that were the strongest and the ones that resonated most with me were the ones that they were emotional and not smiling and dirty and fearless. And I was like, we don't see pictures of girls like this. We, you know, especially here in the South, they are perfectly turned out and smiling. And I wanted girls to know that they were beautiful and they were worthy, and that their worth lied in like pursuing a passion, like finding a passion, pursuing a passion, and being it's funny, my daughter calls them tryhards, and she like says it as a negative thing, and I'm like, that is the nicest compliment I think you could give anybody. I was like, if you try hard and you're enthusiastic about something, it is honestly like, I feel like that is, I don't know, I just love that so much. I was like, your mom is a tryhard. There's nothing wrong with being a tryhard.
It's not cool, right? Like I remember when I was that age, it was like you're too keen. Like you have to chill out a little bit. You can't be like so explicitly into whatever you're into. Yeah. But like, what's the point otherwise?
Yes, like being somebody that like whatever the weird, like tiny thing is, like I love it when people love things. Like I love when they're enthusiastic and they're geeky about it, and they're like fully like, so like their enthusiasm is like bubbling in it over to you, and you're like, all right, I'll check it out, you know, like I love that. And I feel like we don't have enough of that. And because of people, you know, want to look cool or be cool. And yeah, I just feel like we need to do away with cool.
Cool is overdone.
Yes, it's totally overdone.
We need to move past cool. We're in a post-cool world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, who is cool now? Exactly. Like no one is cool. We're not doing anything. We're not going anywhere. So now is the time to just be like, you know what? I really like crocheting, or I really, you know, like whatever your weird, like very specific thing is, like invest in that.
I feel like it's happening.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah.
How have the girls reacted now that the book, you know, is finished, and what was their reaction when they, like, they all got a copy, I would assume, or what is that reaction?
I mean, for a lot of them, the logistics of getting copies to places is especially in a world where like mail is also difficult right now. That's just a whole thing. But yes, they've all gotten access to the book, and I think a lot of it surprised. I think they all knew what it was, right? Like I explained to them, like, this is what it is. This is what you're sharing. These are like, you know, X many other girls are sharing this. But to just see like your day-to-day life on the pages of a book is a very different thing, and be like, oh, right, someone is going to read about the fact that like I woke up, I went to school, and I did my homework, and they thought that was interesting enough to print on the page. And there's been a lot of surprise that like, oh, it's so beautiful, and also like, you know, my life is on the pages and it's not very interesting. I'm like, no, it is interesting. Like you're interested in everyone else, right? So they're interested in you too. And then the other side of it has been a lot of, oh, it's been so long, and like my life looks different, or there are things that I was thinking about back then which has just like shifted so much, or the ways in which I'm like thinking about things has shifted, or, you know, I was in high school and now I'm in college, or I heard through the person who connected us with one of the girls, like she got married and she's like, I think 20 now. And life has changed a lot for some of them. And that is it's a wild thing, like when we put out work into the world, to know it exists for a long time, but to be like 18 or 17 and for what your like day-to-day look like to just be in a book and to be able to go back and revisit it, I think has been both like surprising and also just like wonderful for them.
I know. Were you aware of that? And I remember being very aware of that when creating Strong as You Pretty or Heart of all the books, to make sure I wanted people to be proud to be part of the book and not look back and feel cringe, like embarrassed, or so I mean, as honest as I wanted people to be, I also wanted to protect them a little bit in a way.
I feel very protective of the girls. I feel very like big sisterly, which maybe I shouldn't say, but I do. I'm just like, I want to make sure that they are happy always. And I was very conscious of, I mean, there's so many layers of it, right? Like I wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with these things existing in the world for a long period of time, and that I could like shield them also from like future self looking back and being like, oh, why did I say that? Which didn't happen very often. And then there was like also concerns about, you know, in some places, like just being a girl who shares her work, her words, her life in a book is a very political and politicized thing, and a dangerous thing at times. And so that was like another whole layer that I had to negotiate with them and their families, their communities, to make sure that every girl felt safe and did not feel like, and her family felt safe, and no one felt at all concerned about like her sharing her life. Because in some places, the fact that a book like this exists could be a problematic thing or a dangerous thing for girls.
Which is why it needs to exist in the first place. Did you have did you have to have conversations with parents explaining what we were doing, and sort of, did you meet up with any criticism or concern in that way?
I wanted to make sure that I only included girls whose families were also on board with this, because it shouldn't ever, because like there's no real going back once the book is printed, right? And I was very conscious of that. So I wanted to make sure that I included people who were okay with it and whose families were okay with it. And I'm always very open to answering all questions, to explaining everything a million times over. Like they can ask me absolutely anything because I'm asking them all kinds of things. So like I share whatever I can. But if there were hesitations, I was always very clear of like, if you're feeling like maybe you don't want to do it, it's okay to not do it. Like this is not gonna be a thing where, you know, I'm going to be upset or you're like missing out on some great opportunity. There will be lots of opportunities, but you got to do what feels right and comfortable and safe for you.
Yeah, I felt exactly the same way with all my books. Like I wanted to be completely upfront with what the message was, which was self-acceptance and celebration of who you are, regardless of what that looks like. And anyone that wasn't on board with that, like I was so explicitly clear that I was like, you're we do not need your story if you're going to come out afterwards and be like, well, I didn't know that there was going to be gay people in the book or things like, like I was like, I absolutely did not want, I wanted to make sure people all agreed and were behind the message, which is, how many girls are in your book?
There are 30 girls.
30 girls. Okay. Yeah. So I have, because our books are so similar. It's just, I have a quote from each girl or boy. So we end up with like 200 and something, 250 and some of the pictures are, one quote, but it's 5 girls or 10 boys or whatever. So yeah, I was always like, I want to make sure everyone is aware. This is our message. Just because it's a larger group and I don't know all of the people as well. And they don't always know me. Yeah, it's especially when you're dealing with kids, the kids may be on board, but the parents may not be on board. So it's sort of this like interesting line to walk to make sure that at the end result, nobody's unhappy.
Did you get a lot of pushback when you were putting together the book?
No, I mean, I feel like for Strong as the New Pretty, it's much easier to get on board culturally with girls that are strong. And it's less accepted for Heart of a Boy, which is exactly the same message. We're celebrating our boys for who they are. But instead of, we focused on athletes and we focused on strong boys, but the message was also boys can be vulnerable and they can be emotional. We're just not as farther along in that conversation. And I didn't want boys to be embarrassed to be part of that book or feel like they didn't know what the message was. But it's super interesting because, I've been doing, I've done a lot of like collaborations with brands that will say, we really love Strong as New Pretty. We want to do something like Strong as New Pretty, but for our brand. I've literally never gotten the same thing about Heart of a Boy. Like we would like to show boys as emotional and vulnerable. And we love the way you did in the book. It's just, we're just not there yet.
It feels like there's a longer way to go with the conversations about like boyhood and masculinity. Mm-hmm. And like there is generally around the world much more of like a push of like, empowering girls feels like a thing that you can't really be against.
Yes.
Whereas there's more hesitation, it seems like, with boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and initially I was very against doing a book about boys. I did not want to. I didn't think we needed it. I was like, no, I'm a feminist. I'm doing books. I have girls. I don't have boys. I didn't think it was necessary that they needed me to help amplify their voices. I was like, we hear them loud and clear. We're good. And then I just dipped my toe in a little bit and I was like, what is wrong with you? This is exactly the same message. And for you to just shut off half of the world, meaning me, like for me to shut off half the world and like close my eyes to the fact that we may not be allowing our boys to be exactly who they were born to be or meant to be was just really short-sighted. And I'm just really thankful to have sort of my eyes open to that with that project. Did you have any sort of eye-opening things that you did not know or that you were shocked to learn when you were creating the book or interviewing the girls or in what they sent in their diaries?
I think this is like gonna sound like a cop-out answer, but it isn't. I was just surprised at like how much of myself I saw in them.
Oh.
And in like really unexpected, like I feel like I relate to every girl in the book, which is like there are 30 of them and I feel like I'm each of them and they're all distinct people, but there was always something where I'd be like, oh, I feel exactly that way. And I'm, much older than all of you. And like, I am living my adult life and I am not in this angsty place, but like, yeah, I really feel that. And there was always something like that for every single girl. And that was really surprising to me. it was just like there's so much that they all share in common, and I kind of just wish they could all talk to each other, because it would, it would
Yes.
make all of them feel so much less alone in the world.
I know when this is all over, you need like a summit.
Girlhood summit.
Yes, a girlhood summit. I mean, that would be amazing, you know, and then you could revisit. I'll come take pictures if you'd like. We get it organized.
We can do like every 5 years we revisit the girls and like watch them grow up.
I mean, that's amazing. I feel like that's not even a book. That's a documentary.
There, you know, there is a documentary like that called 7 Up,
Oh,
where it was, I think it was in the UK, where I'm gonna make up all the details now, but I think it was like 30, 50 years, where the photographer went and like revisited the same people over and over again every 5 years. You watch them age, and people die, and people get married, people have children, people have grandchildren. Life keeps happening basically. And there's now a document of like this long period of life of their lives, which is like really beautiful to be able to just like watch people through their lives in a real way, as opposed to like just getting a snapshot of a moment in time.
that's amazing. I need to check that out. Thank you. I mean, not to say that we couldn't do our own, right?
It's like clearly we're just gonna go back now and pitch this to our publishers and be like, hey, Girlhood, part like 17.
No, I love it. I love it. I mean, I think it's so interesting to, you know, to hear about these girls, and yeah, like I think this one of the things that really stuck out to me, like going through the book, is when I was saying this to you earlier, that as a kid, I would have loved this book as a teenager, because I thought a life in India or a life in Italy or a life in the UK looked nothing like my life in America, but they look so similar. And then I think recognizing that sort of thread of humanity and commonality is so important, especially now. And it's so huge to know that girls are going through the same issues regardless of where they live. They look a little bit different, they feel a little bit different, but we all go through the same things. And I really loved how you just sort of like without beating that over the head, it's just kind of throughout this whole book. Is that something that you noticed as well?
I think that was something I like very intentionally set out to do a little bit, because I mean, I think everyone says this at some point when they make books or films. And this was kind of a book I was creating for my teenage self, a little bit of just like there are people like you. And I've been thinking a lot in this week, even as the book has like emerged into the world, of what did I read at that age where I felt seen. And I have my favorite books as a teenager, but there were never any books, like I read books by Indian authors, but they weren't books that really reflected my life. There wasn't a ton of like YA out there that was about people who looked like me. Like the books that I loved, especially as like a kid, I loved like the strong heroines, basically. Like I grew up reading Enid Blyton, who is this English author, very big in, I guess, India as well. And she had this series called The Famous Five, about 5 kids who used to like go on adventures, basically. And the girls were really strong characters in that, and I loved it. Like I loved reading about girls who went on adventures, but they weren't girls who like looked like me or lived in the places I lived in or like dealt with life like I was. And part of what I wanted in this book was just like it would reflect what life looked like for girls in different places. And even if your exact story isn't reflected on the pages of this book, you catch glimpses of what you look like and what your life looks like and what you're thinking about wherever you are. And it was a thing even for me, if like I remember when I moved to the US and like my first day of school in Pittsburgh, a kid was like, "Oh, you're wearing jeans and a t-shirt and you came from India." And I was like, "Yeah." Like I still remember the outfit. I was really proud of it. And he was really surprised because he thought that, you're like, you come from a place where elephants walk on the road. Why would you be wearing jeans and a t-shirt? And like, that was just like the world as he understood it. And that was what he knew at like age 11 of like what the rest of the world looked like. And I hope that like seeing photos of, what life looks like in different places, you're just like, oh, right. our bedrooms might look slightly different, but hey, we both like have the same favorite book, or we both like belting it out to Celine Dion, or we both have like the same favorite movies, and that's really wonderful. And like we're all pretty similar at the end of the day.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. This is such a gift. I mean, honestly, such a gift to these girls. And I think we're supposed to take some questions now.
Yes, thank you so much. Both of you have just provided so much this evening to think about and to embrace. I've just been really touched by this conversation, and so I just want to start by saying thank you. I really appreciate it. Masuma, this is a wonderful project and a wonderful book you've produced. And Kate, I know you've done, it just so turns out that you've done similar work, but different enough that they, that they fill a space in unique ways. And so I really
would encourage everyone to have both of them.
Absolutely. Take two, they're small.
Yeah.
Buy one for a friend.
Exactly right. They make great gifts.
Coffee table. Everyone has a coffee table.
So thank you both so much. Masuma, I wanted to, and we do have some audience questions, and you alluded already to, in a few ways, like why this book matters. And I wonder if you have a way to maybe sum up, there may still be people who wonder, sort of like Kate, as you admitted, thinking at one point, I don't need to do this thing with boys, right? There may be people who wonder why this would need to happen with girls. Why is it important to share these stories? And for anybody to be able to pick up this book and read it.
I think it's really important for us there's two sides of it. One is to be able to see ourselves in what we consume, especially when you're growing up, to see yourself reflected in the pages of the books you read or the movies you watch. And we just don't have enough representation of what it is to be a girl in the world out there. So I'm hoping this book doesn't fill the void, but I'm hoping that it can help push us in that direction a little bit, just like Kate's books have done, to help us understand what life looks like for girls in different places and for them to see themselves reflected. And then on the other side of it, to be an engaged citizen of any community is to be curious about the world around you and to try and understand people around you. And that means you need to know what their lives look like. And we just don't have not anything. We have very little out there where we actually get to see the world through a girl's gaze, especially internationally. Like most media is created by men. It's created by Western people. And I hope that in this book, the fact that you get to hear about girls' lives in their own words, in photos that they have selected and taken, you get a little bit of sense of what, if you took a tour of the world and your tour guide was a girl in every place, this is what it would look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Thank you I just love love being able to sort of encapsulate, because the book does so much. And it's great to be able to sort of hand it to someone and be like, here's why. You might not know that you need this, but you do. And here's why. And then we need this, the people need it. People of all genders. I think that's the other piece. Thank you so much. I want to, if you will indulge me before I get to the questions, if you don't mind, I want to give a shout out to Jenny Liu, who is with us in the audience and asked some great questions, and also happens to be a YA novelist, and has written a couple of really wonderful YA books. And so I just also want to give a shout out to Jenny Liu. So hi, Jenny. And we're gonna post her name in the chat as well, so people can look her up. She wrote "Girls on the Line" and "Like Spilled Water."
I was just gonna ask him, what is she?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for checking her out. So, and I'm gonna start with actually a comment. So great minds think alike. You both were talking and Jenny made a comment about, as you're speaking, I can see you following up with these girls 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And I thought to myself, like the Up series by Michael Apted, I realize I just said great minds think alike and gave myself a compliment. That wasn't my intention. but we're all there, you know, we're all in the same brain space. So the Up series by Michael Apted that you were talking about, that took place in the UK. So I just want to start by saying I think yes to that. If you can make that happen, we would all love to see that happen. It's a wonderful idea. Books or documentary or you know, some sort of series, broadcast series would be wonderful, because there is something so special about that. Oh, hi, puppy dog. There is something so special about seeing people grow and age and having that much more connection to the human experience that way. So, and then on to just a question or two. You alluded to there being some kind of sadness around with some of the girls, Masuma, around feeling like they didn't have enough friendships or quality friendships. Were there any other stories that maybe were, you know, expressed some unhappiness that and that you had to take special care with in terms of how you presented them in the book?
Sometimes that's a good question. I mean, it really varied. Sometimes girls wrote about their circumstances and just feeling a sense of like, why do I have to live in a world where things are so difficult? Like one who comes to mind is Cena. She was 13 when she wrote her diary entries, I think. And she lives in Cité Soleil in Port-au-Prince in Haiti, which is one of the poorest neighborhoods and poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And her neighborhood has a lot of gang violence, and she lives in or at that time she lived in a house which was kind of on the border between two different gang territories, and there was lots of violence around her house. And she writes about like being afraid when her dad goes to work every day, that is he going to come home okay? And you know, there are days when like it's not safe to go out and play with her friends. And she talks about like just the fact that there's a lot of shame around being a girl from that place, and she just wishes she could have been born into easier circumstances. Another girl who writes similarly is Emily from Brazil, who is a mother, and I think she had her baby like a month before she did these diary entries. And so she has photos of just like this adorable little baby and her. And it's hard being a teen mom who grew up in the favela and grew up in poverty and had like a lot of difficult circumstances. And, you know, she has like she writes about the difficulty of that, and then also writes about how she's grateful for the life she's had, and she's like so excited and hopeful for the future, which I think was the thing that came through with everyone, like including Marissa from Haiti, where they would talk about the difficulties they faced and then also turn that around and talk about, because they're at the beginning of their lives, right? And there's so much more out there. Hello.
Hi. This is my 12-year-old.
Thank you for joining us.
Hi, welcome.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
You're fine.
Okay.
That is, yeah, and that's
I mean, work life, right?
Right. And it's kind of the whole thing about this whole online life and work thing, right? Yeah. Masuma, thank you for sharing that. I just want to say that the wonderful thing about the book, and you have written about this as well, is for many people, the only way we have perhaps come to girls in other countries is through tragic stories. You know, we think and read about, you know, the news stories tend to be, and news stories that you've covered these things yourself, tend to be all about human trafficking victims and people who are, you know, and young women who are experiencing these terrible circumstances, or who just are discriminated against and abused. And so the thing that you're doing with the book is you're not pretending that that's not true, but you're again giving these completely real, well-rounded, full pictures of these girls, you know, through their own voices, that remind us that that's not all they are, right? They're not just these, you know, these women over there having these, oh, isn't that terrible isn't it too bad that that has to happen over there to that, to those people, right? And so I appreciate that.
That is like definitely the hope of the book for me as well, was just like, I'm so tired of the way stories are told about places that I'm from. And if I'm tired of it with like all the privileges I have, then a lot of people are tired of it. And we just like don't understand each other, because we only understand each other through the lens of either the news or through culture, which again, like, is created by certain subset of people. And so it sucks when you see your story reflected back, or like see stories from where you're from, or people who look like you or live in places that you do, and you don't see yourself in them, and it's all just like painted through the brushstrokes of horror, where like that's not what life is. And there's a lot of like other stuff in there. None of us should ever be reduced to a single story.
Mm-hmm. The danger of a single story. Give a shout out to Adichie as well.
Yes,
you're on YouTube. Just go ahead and you can look up Danger of a Single Story and watch the TED Talk. Kate, would you, since you've done similar work, I just want to invite you to share anything about what you, and I know it's a little bit different, but about what you may have been surprised about, or what you felt like digging a little bit deeper into girls' lives sort of revealed that maybe you wouldn't have expected as well.
Honestly, one of the things, and again, this is coming from a place of privilege, that I thought I was reiterating a message for girls that they had already heard multiple times, that they can be anything and that just as they are is enough. And oftentimes this was the first time girls were hearing that, or were seeing one of the girls, she's in the book, she is meeting a female firefighter, and her quote is, I didn't know, like, basically, I didn't know I could be a firefighter because I'd never seen a female one before. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we need to, like, and I realized you really cannot dream something unless you see it. And also, if nobody's told you this message before, we need to get ahead of that. We need to bombard our girls with this message, because I really thought I was reiterating something they had already heard at home, they had heard from their teachers. But I remember when I went on my book tour, and I was speaking at a school, this one girl was like, nobody has ever told me that. I've never heard that I was worthy, and that, I'm always just told to be quiet. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much more work to do here. So it was like so sad to hear that. But also I was like, I'm so glad that we're trying to change that narrative a little bit.
Absolutely. I would like to go ahead and invite you. I just realized that we're almost at 7 o'clock, which happened really quickly. Oh, speaking of the time, Masuma, thank you so much for being with us in the middle of the night.
Thank you for having me. It's
we really
spend my evening with all of you.
We really appreciate it. And so I want to wrap up with something that we do, and I mentioned to y'all ahead of time, where we like to get book recommendations from the authors for the folks who are with us live or watching the video later. And I know that you both have one in common, which we'll start with. And Kate has the book. Kate, why don't you model it, and Masuma, you can talk about it, and then you can.
I'll pretend to be Syria.
Yeah.
It is a wonderful, wonderful book about a girl who is a soccer player in Argentina, and just like all the struggles about being an athlete as a young woman, and just like so empathetically told. And I was rooting for her. I'm not an athlete, never was, but I was rooting so hard for her and like wanted to be her a little bit. So yeah, very much recommend Furia. Yeah,
there's sports. There you get to kind of like learn about her country. I learned some words that I didn't know before, and also there's this like love in there. There's like a love interest that you told. It's just, I feel like it's got everything. I loved it. Made me cry for sure. It's such a good book.
Thank you. Did you? And that's certainly sufficient. But if you had another recommendation, we can also that you'd like to mention.
Yeah,
we're happy for you too, and we can put it in the chat.
Yeah, this is not necessarily a YA book or for girls. It's for women. It's one of my good friends just is coming out with this on the 23rd, and so it's called Your Fully Charged Life. It's just like about, which I think is so important today. Megan Murphy is just one of the most positive people I've ever met, and has so much energy. And it's just kind of how to sort of shift your perspective and attitude a little bit to be more appreciative, and which I think we all could use a little bit of these days. I love this book, and sometimes I need a little kick in the butt, and this is certainly stop feeling sorry for yourself and get moving kind of thing.
Thanks, Kate. What about you, Masuma?
So I don't have the physical copy with me, but my pandemic reading has been a mixture of grief books. I don't know why. Like, I have not dealt with any personal grief in the pandemic, but grief books and lots of YA, and it's been like a high-low for me. And like a chicklet type book that I read recently that I really loved was called Aisha at Last, which is like a Pride and Prejudice twist, which I feel like, but it's about a diasporic Indian Muslim family living in Canada. And it's got the arranged marriage thing going on, but it's about this like fierce girl who's trying to like figure out her own way into things. And there's like a Mr. Darcy type character. And it was one of those books where I sat down to read it at like 8 p.m. and then I went to bed when I was done. So very much recommend it.
Yeah, that's always the best kind of recommendation. Yeah, where you literally can't put it down. Excellent. Well, thank you both again so much. It's been wonderful to sit in on your conversation, and we're so appreciative. Thank you. And thanks again to everybody who has joined us this evening, or who is watching this at a later date. We appreciate you spending some time with us to share in this. And I'll leave the last words to the two of you before we sign off for the evening.
Well, I will definitely let you finish. I just love your book, and I think you're doing such a good thing that you're putting out in the world. And I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you. I feel the same way about your books as well. And just like, thank you all for joining, being here, buying our books, supporting girls everywhere. Very much appreciate it.